Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Overcoming Graduation with Brian Drury, a show where I work to teach you everything I wished I had known about habits and mindset to help you begin creating your dream life starting today. Now, today we are launching part 2 of my interview with Kirk Nurmi, and if you haven't already listened to part 1, I highly recommend you go back and check that episode out, because we talk about Kirk's journey up until this point. We talk about being rejected from law school and what he needed to do to overcome those rejections to ultimately become a practicing defense attorney. We talk about what it was like defending Jodi Ann Arias in one of the most infamous court cases probably of all time, and what it was like to be a person that was constantly in the public spotlight, easily recognizable, receiving hate mail and death threats, and what Kirk did to get through that difficult time. We also talked about his battle with cancer and his battle with weight, the things that he has overcome and faced, the decisions he made, and how he confronted himself with important questions and has chosen to live a life of joyful urgency. So that's all in part 1. Now in part 2, Kirk is going to tell us about the answer to living happy. Kirk has published 3 books. He's a professional speaker. He's been featured on major television networks frequently in news shows, and he's about to launch his first ever one-man show. So he has been using happiness as a beacon for a long time. And in this episode, he's going to discuss why he has removed the word work from his vocabulary. The one question he asks himself to help him let go of unneeded stress, anxiety, and worry. What he believes is a bigger problem than obesity in our country. His ultimate answer on how to live happy. What it takes to unlock our greatness. How he was able to lose 85 pounds using his diet bank account approach. And so much more. So guys, without any further ado, let's dive in and let's start connecting again with Kirk for part 2. All right, everyone, we are back for part 2 with Kirk Nurmi, and we left off talking about joyful urgency and Kirk's harrowing battle with cancer. So Kirk, joyful urgency, that's one of my new favorite expressions, because I feel like in life there's a sense of I want to do so many things, but a lot of times I've just had that sense of urgency without the joy. And I'm like, oh, I'll be happy later. So can you tell the listeners a bit about when you were ending that battle with cancer, how did you start to live with joyful urgency and start pursuing the things you really wanted to?
Well, I think it started with the idea of making happiness the priority in my life, right? So many times in all of our lives, and it was certainly true of me. Last episode, we talked about the goals I had, reaching law school and then becoming a licensed lawyer and all those things. I realized that I was jumping from a set of goals, and the only time that there was true happiness is when I was on the platform, so to speak, getting the medal. But when I was going towards the next goal, then the happiness went away. And because and as time developed, I started having a real problem with goals, because every time we set a goal, we are quote unquote a failure until we achieve that goal. And of course, being a failure is you're not happy about that, right?
Right. So
rather than making all these benchmarks, these accomplishments, whatever it was going to be, the priority in my life, or even if we were talking also other things like salary and income and possessions and everything like that, why not make happiness the priority in my life? Because one of the things I started asking myself, and stepping back a bit, when I was thinking about this battle with cancer and deciding whether I wanted to go through chemotherapy, I started asking myself that question, are you happy? And I think we talked a little bit last time about how I confronted myself with that question.
Yes.
Because I had to get the accurate answer. And so confronting myself with that question put happiness into my mind. And I thought, why don't I make happiness my priority instead of all these goals? Because, if we're here, I don't think we're here to work and pay bills.
Right.
As humans, I think no matter what you believe, spiritually, metaphysically, whatever, that doesn't seem to fit, right? That we're here to work and pay bills. So I started thinking about having joy be a part of every single day and everything I do. And even here recently, I've gone so far, although I'm certainly not 100% of that, I've tried to eliminate the word work from my vocabulary. Because I'm not working on my book. I have the opportunity to publish a book. I have the opportunity to create a book. So the process in and of itself became fulfilling. The journey, the climb became fulfilling. And what I wanted to do and all those things I wanted to do could still be done, but I took joy in every day. And I think another thing I did along the way that I think is really important is the idea that we're all going to have bumps on the road, right? We're all going to have days that aren't our best, days that, maybe we get a flat tire or a girlfriend breaks up with us, whatever it might be. And I use this as a marker for myself when those things happen. If this were my last day on the planet, if I was on my deathbed tomorrow, would I be worrying about this thing that is bothering me now? And odds are, 99.9% of the time, it's probably not going to be something that's going to be bothering you the next day, or at least on your last day, I should say. So that brings the reality of our mortality into view, but it also brings about the idea that some of these things that are sucking away our happiness are so temporary and so transitory that they're not even worth degrading your happiness in order to think about those things, in order to offer that much attention to your concern.
This is so important for all the listeners. I really want you to listen here, because this message it's said so many different ways, and we can gloss over it, like enjoy the journey is the destination. We hear things like that and go, yeah, but I'll be happy when I get the boat. I'll be happy when I get the money. But Kirk was faced with a challenge that was so intense and so real, and faced with his own mortality to the point where you really have to confront yourself, which, Kirk, I love the way you phrase that, confronting yourself with the honest question of, am I truly happy? And something that I heard recently in Mel Robbins' book, the 5-second rule, she talks about how, because for a while I thought like, oh, I'm a happy guy, but I'm an anxious person, or I'm not grateful. Why am I so ungrateful? And I started to peg myself with these different identities. And like you talked about, when you're going through your different search, your different things that you faced in your life, it's, what is my identity? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to show up as? And one of the most powerful lessons I learned from her about this battle and this journey to find gratitude and happiness and joy is, she said, it's not that you're an anxious person or an angry person or a bad person. It's that you have a habit of anxiety. You have a habit of being stressed. You have a habit of looking at the dark side of things. So like you did, you made the choice to start making it about positivity. You made the choice to start changing the language. Like for me, a big thing that I'm working on is, instead of saying I have to do this, is saying I want to, because I really do want to be doing these things. So you've taken this step and you've started this evolution into positivity, and you had moved away from law. So how did you figure out what was the next step you wanted to take in terms of a career or a life that you're building to serve?
Well, I started just using happiness as that beacon, right? If you could imagine kind of a lighthouse off in the sea, just moving towards that happiness. And I think that is, like, somebody recently asked me about how do you make such dramatic change? And it sounds so cliche, but it's one step at a time. It's one move at a time. So I did what I talked about in the last episode. I followed my heart, started saying, okay, I want to do this. I want to pursue this. And there was 90% of the time, I would catch myself at times, because I'm certainly not perfect when I say these things. But I try to do things without expectation, without a tie to the idea that this is going to make me rich, or this is going to make me famous, or this is going to get me wherever it's going to get me. It's just like, I want to do this. So, publishing weight loss books, publishing other books, writing for the New York Daily News, all those things that, hey, okay, this sounds good. This may or may not lead to anything, but it sounds good. And the ultimate byproduct of that was it did start generating some success in my life in terms of happiness, using happiness as a synonym for success. And it started after a while kind of clearing up the picture of what I wanted to do and really digesting the lessons that I've learned through dealing with infamy and cancer and relaying those to people but it took time for me to learn those lessons myself. That's why this book that I'm publishing in January of 2019 took about 2.5 years to write because I needed to go so deep to teach the lessons that I teach, and now I do that in different ways. And that mission revealed itself to me by introspection, meditation, and keeping happiness as the beacon.
And you did the work, because one of my favorite quotes that one of my coaches shared with me is that clarity isn't a requirement for taking action, but a result of taking action. And when I'm talking with people, with coaching clients, with just friends of mine, one of the main things, and when I have to check myself, because like you said, you did deep introspection and self-work, and that's the constant work that we need to do if we want to be able to serve and help. You and I both know that because our mentors have taught us that. And one of the main things that I would see is that when I started to get off, and when I was not really connected with my purpose was when I stopped doing the work and just wanted people to see, like, just come to my podcast, just come to my YouTube page. It's like, I've grown enough. I've developed enough. It's like, cause that's my ego trying to protect me or trying to keep me lazy. But when we have that moment of clarity and we realize it's about doing this deep work and taking the steps, people always ask, well, how do you get more clarity? How do you know? Like, how do I know it's going to succeed? I don't know. I can't take the step till I know. And I'm like, you will never know if you even like it until you try. And because you were willing to take those steps to make the effort, to try and fail, to experiment and explore, instead of having this, I wonder if, you go, oh, I know, I love this. This isn't for me. And that's the way I want to go. That's where the clarity's coming. So you've talked about this book that came about as a result of that. So can you share with the listeners what is the premise of the book? What is the intent or the goal that you hope to empower people with through this story you're sharing?
Yeah, part of the introspection that I engaged in and over those years and taking that intense look at myself, there was so much that I wanted to relay about my cancer experience and so much that I wanted to do for those who battle cancer. But I realized that the lessons I learned were much more universal. And I started thinking about the way we're living our lives and how I was living my life. In my late 40s, I'm a successful, nationally known lawyer. I've got a decent income. I've got all the comforts, so to speak. And I wasn't happy. And I thought about how many people in my profession and in many others just weren't happy. Mm-hmm. And, Michelle Obama says that obesity is our number one health issue. I would say that it's unhappiness, because that is an antecedent of, weight problems and behavioral problems and drinking problems and everything else. Because if we're happy, we just don't feel the need to act that way. So I started wondering to myself, and I started really looking at the process that I went through. How can I teach people how to be happy? And the real answer to me was living their most authentic life. Mm. And part of that to me means that going back to that childhood, but even going back further, going back to that point of birth and that purpose on the planet that I was referencing a few minutes ago, like we're not born to pay bills and die, right? Mm-hmm. So I started really realizing that each one of us has a purpose on this planet, a unique gift. It's not just a matter of we're going to spit out 30 lawyers and 20 accountants and 10 doctors. It's a matter of being able to do that in its own unique way, and that what begins to cause unhappiness, and I use the analogy of like that we're really born with a metaphysical P in our heart, right? That is like the Wi-Fi bars, and it's shooting out signal to the universe, letting you know that you're there, letting the universe know you're there, and that you will connect to something that you want to do. Before you reach that double-digit age, there'll be something that you're passionate about. You might not even understand why. For me, it was like a little book about wanting to be a lawyer. I might have mentioned this. She wants to be a lawyer and just being fascinated by it, but not being deterred by the realities of what it took to get into law school. Mm-hmm. Just making that connection. We talked also about the great candy theft of 1970s,
the great scandal.
Probably.
The culprit is still out there, I hear.
Right up there with Watergate.
Still on the lam, but, it's one of the most controversial cases in history.
Yeah. But those things, those connections that happened were where I needed to go. And at that point in my life, that's where the universe was pulling me. And the problem is, as we get older, I think a lot of stuff gets thrown on top of that signal, right? You can't get a Wi-Fi signal if you're down in a tunnel. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're getting these things that mess with that greatness, that connection, like practicality and, like you're told you're not good enough to be a lawyer, or all kinds of any kind of things, childhood imprinting, the list goes on and on. Your own mental martyr, feeling like you're not worthy of whatever it is you want to do. All those things start to block that signal. And what we really need to do is, for lack of a better word, excavate all that stuff off of us so we can make that connection. And it may be different in different phases of life. So I realized that what I was doing when I was leading Happiness as a Beacon and making those steps is excavating some of the stuff. Like a lot of people say, don't give up your law license, fight for it. You didn't do anything wrong, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't want it. It was impractical. It was against the grain. It made no sense. I had to lose some friends along the way that didn't understand. But it was excavating all those things, that status, the ego, all those things, just excavating all that stuff out and realizing then the connection that I talked about a few minutes ago about wanting to share these lessons through speaking, through my one-man show that I'm developing, through my books. All those sort of things come out and come through me, and there's different ways to teach these lessons. And every one of us, I have no superpowers. Every one of us has the ability to start excavating the stuff that's blocking that signal and connecting to the universe. Because once that connection is made, you know exactly where you need to go.
It's so true. And I love that visual. I'm picturing this all-powerful, clear, knowing, strong version of each and every one of us, but we've piled all this shit on top of ourselves. We put our doubts, our insecurities, our limiting beliefs, our family's limiting beliefs, society's view. We put all that stuff on top of us. We think it's a blanket, but really it's crippling us and it's hiding our light. But by, like you said, doing the work. And that's the thing. So many people, how do I do it? It's like, just take action, start moving, start trying. You shed these things off and the light is able to shine through. And I love the piece you said about excavating and removing the ego's drive or the ego's kind of voice in the conversation, because it's not about us when it all comes down to it. Is that us sharing our light and us sharing our greater version of ourselves is about bringing this amazing message out, but we've got to be willing to get past our own demons and our own challenges. So can you share the title of the book with the listeners as well before we move on to another topic?
Sure. The book is called Defend Your Greatness, and it just is my kind of recipe, if you will, for defending your greatness and different things you can do just to kind of start the excavation process. Because I created this book because I know not everybody can go to my talks and they can sit down and read this over and over again and hopefully get something different from it every time.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And listeners, be sure to go pick up a copy. I will absolutely be getting one as soon as it comes out. And Kirk, a very common question that I get is, how did you write a book? How long did it take? What was your process? How did you figure out what you wanted to write about? So we've heard about your process and kind of determining what it is you wanted to write about, but my book took over 2 years to write as well. So I know that process and the edits. So can you tell the listeners about the process for writing a book and share any recommendations you have for anyone who's interested in potentially writing one themselves?
Sure. I mean, this will be my third book now, and they've all been kind of different in the process. I wrote a book about the Arias trial, and that was kind of a recantation, so that was kind of easy. And I wrote a book about my weight loss, and that was also kind of a recantation of how I lost 85 pounds between spring of 2014 and the fall of 2014. But this book, I think, was difficult in the sense that I needed to learn the lessons. I needed to understand. I wrote 2 manuscripts that I wasn't happy with. So if I were to give advice, I would say that don't have any expectations to begin with. Don't have any expectations. Don't put any deadlines on yourself, etc. The topic that you are going to write about has to be one that you understand, and I think that's why there was ease with book about the trial, book about weight loss, because it was recantations of something I completely understand. Mm-hmm. But when you're talking about something that maybe you don't understand or something that you want to share with the world, a lesson you want to teach, you need to make sure that you fully learn that lesson before you publish. But also be aware of the fact that as you write, you are also learning. So don't be, and that's why I say don't be tied to a particular outcome. Don't be tied to anything. Just start writing, and if it's crap, like I say, I wrote 2 manuscripts, 2 failed attempts that I thought, these aren't what I want. And who knows, maybe they'll go another book, but these aren't what I want. But those so-called failed manuscripts were not failures. They were just stepping stones towards what I ultimately needed to write. So not having expectations, not forcing a certain outcome into your book, I think leaves you open to letting, that excavation process come through in your book once you're done excavating, if you will, or to a point anyway where your signal can beam through, because that's what you want in your book.
And that process of learning as you go is so critical. And I think it's really important too that for the listeners, if you're thinking about writing a book, recognize you will learn, you will grow, but at some point you do need to let it go. So like Kirk said, you need to learn the lesson and you need to have the understanding to be able to communicate it in your writing, but that doesn't mean you need to be perfect. I think that's something that, as I don't know for you, Kirk, but for me, when I got closer and closer to publishing, I went through 9 full content edits of my book, and it's a several 100-page book. And it was maddening. And there was a point where I said, well, I've learned more lessons and I've got more to share. And I need to tweak this. Because I was afraid to put it out there. And at one point, my dad said, when I was very close to publishing, my dad said, save it for the next book. So there's a point where it's time to let it go and go serve people. Doesn't mean you're done learning or growing in that area. It just means your understanding of the lesson up to that point, that's where it's at. When you go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, there's always constant evolution of your thought process. And your dad's right. You save it for the next book. You digest those lessons and go forward. Because, it could be fear. There's all kinds of fears. Nobody's going to buy this book, whatever. And that may very well be true, but so what? Because you've benefited from the writing process.
And for anyone thinking about doing it, just coming up with the idea, that can be a win. Writing the title, that can be a win. Writing your first line can be a win. Your first draft. Like Kirk talked about earlier in this episode, when you enjoy the process, it becomes a discovery and an evolution. So through writing a book, you can learn more about yourself than you've ever learned. And whether or not it gets purchased, whether or not you issue it or launch it, it may be something that just gives you so much benefit. So this is why what Kirk is saying, I think it's just such an important message. And I really want to hammer it home that going, seeking, trying, experimenting, exploring, and actually taking action towards our goals leads to some of the most incredible things, and I think the most incredible things in our life. Now, Kirk, before we move on from your books, I know there's going to be some listeners that are curious, because I am curious about how you lost the 85 pounds in that short time frame. But I also know you had the additional challenges associated with chemotherapy that complicate weight loss or weight gain. It changes the game. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about how you were able to lose all that weight in such a short time?
Sure. Now, to be clear, the weight loss that I'm talking about happened before the cancer diagnosis.
Okay.
So what I did is I just made sure, well, first of all, I think the biggest key to weight loss is that I decided that I didn't want to be heavy anymore, that I wanted it more. And I say that as an initial matter because you've really got to want it more than you want the piece of pie. You know what I'm saying? So you've got to have that will for yourself to have that weight loss. So beyond that, I mean, because without the will, you're just going to fall apart, right?
Right.
So what I basically did was I decided that I was going to eat between 1,200 and 1,600 calories a day. And it was going to, I didn't say, I'm going to count calories. I didn't walk around and do math. You know, you can look at restaurant menus. You can get an idea. You can get an idea looking at different things. And so it was never, I say between 12 and 1,600. Like I say, it was never complicated. I knew that if I was going to break it down and sit there and like weigh stuff on a scale, and how many ounces of chicken was I going to eat, anything like that? No. Just get the best estimate I could on how many calories was something was going to be and set a target for 12 or 1,600 calories. And what I did in addition to that is kind of make it like a bank account, if you will. And so I started out with that number during the day and was very conscious of how much I had left going on and what I was going to be able to eat. So I never really restricted myself of anything. But I also knew, and I didn't do this because it would be so many calories, but I knew that if I was going to have say a 600 calorie slice of pizza, dinner was going to be pretty short, you know? So I just took it that way, never denied myself anything, but just kept that bank account. And I did that too with also just accounting for, say, special events, parties. As a matter of fact, you know, the Super Bowl was going on, and there was a big Super Bowl party that I was at, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to use this bank account instead of just, you know, going and gorging out and not caring. I planned for it. I cut back a little bit on the calories, and then I had all the fun I wanted at the party, and then I cut back again. So it kind of evened the calorie playing field for the week or the 2 weeks. So I just kept that mindset towards it because it allowed for deviations. I wasn't a failure if I had a piece of pizza at the Super Bowl party. It was just a matter of I was drawing on my account and I was going to have to pay it back.
I love the first piece where you said that you needed to shift the will. And to me, when I talk about this, I talk about the shift in the identity, because you said, I don't want to be big anymore. Because a lot of people say, I want to lose 30 pounds. They start there, they do it, they go on a crash diet, or maybe they even diet successfully for a time, but they haven't shifted the identity from, I don't want to do this anymore, or I don't want to carry this weight. Because that initial identity shift is one of the biggest things in making sure that it's going to be a lasting change. And I loved how you found a method that worked for you. You didn't say, I need to restrict everything, I need to cut everything out. So for all the listeners, it's not about that there's one way or one right or wrong way. It's about finding the method that works for you. And Kirk, what I love that you did as well is that you found a way to make it about love, about permission, that it wasn't this like strict, sharp, like finger wagging at yourself, like, oh, you had a slice of pizza, you son of a bitch. Because I do that to myself. And just hearing this, I'm like, that actually sounds a hell of a lot better. It's just to be able to have a treat, have something here and there and enjoy it. And then say, okay, how do I balance this out? How do I keep my bank account where it needs to be? So that is fantastic.
Well, yeah, and if I might add to it, I think one of the things that I thought was really great about it, that I think from a psychological standpoint helps too, is that whatever program you create, calorie-wise and whatever exercise you think is appropriate for you, given your health issues or what have you, I created my own plan, so I was invested in it. So it wasn't I could pass the buck to say, you know what, Weight Watchers doesn't work for me, or Nutrisystem or whatever doesn't work for me. It was my plan. I was invested. So that made me more determined, if you will, to make it work.
Sounds to me, Kirk, like you were defending your greatness in a sense. If, I think I might have just come up with that phrase. So, all right, man, fantastic. So we've talked about the books. I want to dive into the one-man show a bit, because that piece, though, that you just said, to me, it's about not playing the victim. That you made a decision that you're not going to point fingers. You're not going to just attach to a program. And you know what's very interesting? I believe there are times that we do that because then we have someone to blame. We latch onto this. Oh, I'm going to try P90X. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. When people want to learn a language, I'm going to try Rosetta Stone. I'm going to try Duolingo. And they go, it just didn't work for me. But the people who do succeed are the ones who find a way regardless, and they combine methods and they find what works for them and they stay consistent. And you were able to do that by not accepting an identity that says I can't or I won't or I'm going to point fingers. You decided to defend your greatness and said, this is something I want. This is a change I'm going to make, and I'm going to stick to it. So that is phenomenal. And I know that same determination has led to speaking and now what is going to be a one-man show. So can you tell us about the one-man show that you're going to be putting on?
Sure. What I really want to do in the one-man show, is to have fun and teach. I call it a four-hat, funny, inspirational one-man show. And I want to teach some of the lessons of my life that I learned by having some fun, by not just, my talks I think are fun, but this is a different way to present it. This is a different way to induce more laughter, to kind of get people to know me apart from the persona that they saw on TV, 24 hours a day back in 2013 when I was lead counsel for Jodi Arias. They get to see a different side of me. They get to understand my story, and hopefully they're going to laugh and get to learn, take away something about how they can bring more joy and happiness into their lives. So, this is a way, people see me on TV, they hear me on podcasts, they think they understand who I am. This is kind of ripping the cover off that in a way that hopefully makes them laugh and makes them consider making changes in their own life.
I love that you don't wait for people to change their perception, that you have chosen to reinvent your image, and under that, it's like you're reinventing yourself so that you can show people the real Kirk. And it comes through in everything. Like, as I've gotten to know you over the years, it's the way you dress, the way you talk, the way you present yourself, that this journey of evolution and reframing what people see or they think they know is such a powerful thing for us to do as individuals, whether we're presenting or not, is to say, who am I? How do people see me? Not that I need them to see me a certain way in order to be happy, but how can I communicate this story so that they really see the real me, the full me? And you've been doing that step by step throughout your life.
Well, and one thing I would say is that, people think they know me. And so changing my image is certainly one way to think of it, but maybe shining the truth on the misconceptions about who I am is more what I'm doing. But I think one thing that is empowering to me is the fact that I'm doing that not with the idea of external validation. I'm not going out there and asking the crowd, please love me. When I go on TV shows, when I go on HLN, I make legal commentary, I don't go out there and say, please love me. I go out there, I'm who I am, I'm my most authentic self, and inevitably somebody's going to say something about something. Being on TV is just an exaggerated experience of real life, because then you just have more people that are willing to criticize your hair or your hat or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just to, just to be myself and offer people the opportunity to see who I am authentically without the quest for asking for their validation, because I don't care about it.
Well, and chasing validation is a never-ending chase that will never lead to happiness. That's coming from me being a person who, for most of my life, was seeking external validation in so many different ways and wondering why I was never happy, that I was seeking accomplishments, just like you talked about, where I'd be happy maybe for a day when I achieved the goal and I achieved this big lifelong dream, and then I'm back to being me. Okay, now I need to go chase something again because I feel like shit. And hearing messages from people like you and learning from our mentors and coaches, I've gotten to see the flaws in that way of thinking, and I'm learning more to just be me, to bring it out and to not go there and do these things seeking validation, but to do it from a place of I want to share things that have helped me, and also being consistent on the path no matter what the external stimuli are. When we know in our heart, like you've talked about, when we have that guiding force, that light inside, when we have that, to keep chasing it no matter what, because incredible things happen when we do. So, Kirk.
Well,
go ahead.
Not only is it about incredible things, but what's the alternative?
Yeah.
The alternative, when misery or discomfort or surviving rather than thriving in life is the alternative, to me it seems like a non-issue, because one of the things that I think is inherent in joyful urgency is the fact that we're going to die. Mm-hmm. So when you live in joyful urgency, as I see it anyway, or as I characterize it, you are going to get to that point where you die, but if you live in joyful urgency, you're not going to regret how you lived, because you truly lived.
Mm-hmm. It's an incredible thing when we shrink that down to the microcosm of a day, and we're able to live with joyful urgency in a day, and we lie down in bed going, that was a good one. That went great. I lived with joyful urgency. I loved, I shared, I cared, I did what I could to help people. I was in the moment. And that's something that I have so much work to do on, is being present and being there. But having that joyful urgency, I think, applies to all areas where we go, I'm going to have a sense of urgency about how important I make my self-care and how important I make my presence with others, my connection with others. It goes into everything. So you have talked about showing people the real Kirk, and you have done so much work and invested time, money, and energy in learning more about you and who you really are. So when you're asked that question now of who is Kirk Nurmi, who are you at this point, and who do you want the world to see in terms of the authentic expression of you, deeply excavating all of that stuff off so your true light is shining?
Well, that's a really good question. But at the same time, I don't know that I want to be anything else other than who I am and my most authentic self, and what people see or what people think is just not important.
Mm. That's great, man. It's so important to see. For the listeners, I really want you to lean in on that emphasis on, it's not about other people's perceptions. It's about our internal journey. It's about our internal path. It's about sharing what we want to, experiencing what we want to, and doing our best to help and serve and help others defend their greatness as they go through their journey. Because the more that we do this for ourselves, we shed all of our masks, we excavate all of the junk off of us, we enable and inspire others to do it just through living our journey. So, Kirk.
And it would be inauthentic of me to really be overly concerned with what people think.
Mm-hmm. 100%. It's something that it's really easy to get caught up in all the social media, all the nonsense and likes and follows and all these things, but that can all just become a massive distraction from the work we're really meant to do. So, Kirk,
that's exactly right.
Before we go into the closing question, is there anything else that I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to cover and you'd like to share with the listeners?
I guess, one of the things that I think is important to probably couldn't be emphasized enough that I talk about in Defending Your Greatness. I talk about my talks. I'm going to talk about in my show. I've kind of hinted at it when I said we're not here to be born, pay bills, and die. It's the baseline reality that each and every person listening to this, whether they think I'm horrible or a hero, is that they're great. They were born great. They were born with greatness inside them. Whether they want to believe that came from a deity, whether they want to say that came from Mother Nature, or wherever they want to say that came from. That baseline is so needed by all of us to get anywhere towards happiness or anything else. And so many of us doubt that.
Mm-hmm.
So many of us don't recognize that. So many of us, whether it's fear or whatever keeps us from recognizing that, is that if you are rejecting your greatness, if you're listening to this right now and saying you're not great, no, Kirk's got it wrong, he really doesn't know me. I would say that you're arguing against every major philosophical, religious, and even Darwinian scientific principle about the evolution of the planet. So if you're listening to me, you're great. And you need to start that as a baseline, and you need to accept that moving forward.
And knowing that in our core, knowing that that's our base, that's where we start from, and that we've just piled stuff on top, that's a beautiful place to be, because then we can take the steps and make the effort to remove those things off of us. It's not that we're terrible or not or horrible at our core. We just have piled up a bunch of junk. That beautiful, bright, shining version of us is there. It's just about shedding all those layers that we've either intentionally or unintentionally covered ourselves with. So, Kirk, man, we have one more question to close this out, and then
all right,
I'll ask you to share about your upcoming events, where people can learn more about you. But before that, this is the way we close out every one of these interviews, and I love to ask my guests, if you could go back to talk to your younger self, and normally it would be at high school or college graduation, what advice would you give your younger self? But I'd love to go back to that time when you were getting all of these rejection letters from all these law schools. And we talked about it a bit in the first interview, but if you could go back to yourself at that point when you hit a real low, when it seemed like it was rejection after rejection, what advice would you give to younger Kirk in that moment, if you could speak to him right now?
I wouldn't give any, because he needed to learn it himself.
He needed to see it for himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of this answer, I know, can be something where people go, oh, but you could have given him advice and insight, but it's such an interesting thing to think about, because with that, you wouldn't have had the experiences, the challenges, the things you've overcome, and now those challenges are gifts for you to share with the world because of the work that you've done to overcome them.
Yeah, and we can't, the advice of others, and in your question, I would be an outsider, I guess, is the advice of others only goes so far if we don't really understand it ourselves at our core, if it doesn't mean anything to us. And that's part of, to me, defending your greatness is being inside, being secure in your journey, and safe within your heart. So, young Kirk, didn't need the advice. He needed the opportunity to learn, because old Kirk benefited from those lessons.
And part of what I love about that is right there when you said old Kirk benefited from it, you're sending love to your younger self. You're sending some gratitude back in time for the younger version of you that made mistakes, that wasn't sure about things, that tried and failed. And so for all the listeners, that can be a very, very powerful exercise. It's something Vishen Lakhiani talks about, is going back to your past selves, your younger versions, and just sending some love back, because you did your best with what you had at that time. You learned, you grew, and those experiences helped you become who you are today. So Kirk, man.
And thereby I would correct one thing you said, if I could be so bold. Thereby, one thing to say is that what you're calling mistakes weren't really mistakes.
Right.
They were lessons. They were paths on your journey.
Mm-hmm. And any experience we can choose to make it a mistake and not learn from it and ruminate on it, or do exactly what Kirk just did and reframe it to be a lesson that is fueling us and propelling us forward to grow. In the same way, his first 2 manuscripts, they weren't failures, they weren't mistakes. They were fueling him towards this book that we're all going to be so fortunate to read in not too long. It's coming up pretty quick, man. So
yeah, we should have it out by mid-January. So
fantastic. So I'll be sharing that out on my social media channels. We'll make sure the links are included here on where people can get that. And for now, Kirk, if you could also share, where can people come to learn more about you and the amazing work that you're doing?
Sure. My website is unchainedlives.com. One word, unchainedlives.com. And what I keep up there is all my books are up there, links to all my books. And I have a list of my speaking events as well as my one-man shows and whatever else I'm doing. Is always updated. It's going through a bit of a remake or remodel, I should say, over the next few weeks. But before you know it, all my dates will be up there and everything you want to know, and you have a chance to email me through that too if you're interested in dialoguing more.
Fantastic, man. And I'll be sure to include links to ticket purchases for your upcoming events when these episodes launch. And Kirk, brother, it has been a lot of fun, man. Thank you so much for taking this time for sharing with me and my listeners.
It's been awesome. Thank you, Brian. What an honor.
All right, guys, I want to highlight just a couple of my favorite parts from today's interview with Kirk. Now, the first piece, that question that he asked, if I were to die tomorrow, would this really be a big deal or a big issue for me? I think so often, and I know it's true for me, and I assume it's true for most other people, that we can get so wrapped up in small things. We can let the tiniest thing derail our day and derail our happiness. We lose sight of maintaining happiness as a beacon because we feel entitled to feel frustrated or angry or upset. But when we choose to put it in perspective of the big picture and the grand scheme, it's so often so small and so trivial, the things that we worry about. And I know it's definitely true for me. I'm speaking just from my own lens right now. So many of the things I worry about are nonsense. And what's unfortunate is oftentimes as human beings, we need some massive cataclysmic thing, or we feel we do, in order to help us put things in perspective. That's why death or injury or illness are things that really cause people to question where they're at. But by using this method that Kirk described, we don't need to have tragedy happen in our lives to start living the way we really want to and enjoying the ride and living with joyful urgency, having happiness as a beacon. So I think it's so important to remember that. It's so important to have these powerful questions that we can use to lift ourselves up in those moments where we're feeling lost, scared, frustrated, to really focus on what really matters. Now, one of my other favorite points from this was the concept of unlocking our greatness is like an excavation. It's that we have this inner greatness, this stuff that's lying there dormant inside of us many times because we've covered it up with all these lies and excuses, insecurities, doubts, and fears. But really, all it takes is for us to excavate, to bring out what's already there, to embrace it, and then to use that greatness to learn and grow and thrive the ways we want. So I love that concept of it's already there inside us. Our happiness, our joy, our peace, our light, our mission, our purpose, it's there. It's just waiting for us to get rid of all the nonsense we've thrown on top of it. It's like picking up a pile of clothes and finding that, oh my God, I found a $20 bill. This is an amazing surprise. But instead of a $20 bill, it's your entire greatness, your purpose, your being. And that idea of just excavating, and either you get a shovel and you're digging these things out and you find this treasure, or whatever visual you want to use, I think it's something that when you recognize it's already sitting there inside of you, it's waiting for you, then all it is okay, what do I need to do to bring this out? So guys, I love connecting with Kirk. This was a blast doing this interview with him, and he has so many different areas of his life that he has worked and improved and challenged and grown, and he's constantly taking on new things to get out of his comfort zone and work to serve, give, and spread joyful urgency, not just live with it himself. So be sure to go check out unchainedlives.com. I've also included in the show notes a link to his upcoming events and a link to his book, Defend Your Greatness, which is now available on Amazon. So be sure to go check that out. Now, if you have not already subscribed to the Overcoming Graduation podcast, be sure to do so on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And if you'd like to reach out to me directly to give feedback on the show, to send some love to Kirk and thank him for one of the best messages you got from my interview, either part 1 or part 2, if you want to just reach out and say anything, I love hearing from you guys. I love connecting. So feel free to send me an email at brian@overcominggraduation.com. That is going to be all for today, guys. I love you all. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for being a part of the show. And I'll be talking to you again real soon.